some introductions first. I'm Liz Peace, and I am privileged to be a board member at the Connected Places Catapult. I've actually been the SID since January. I joined Connected Places Catapult in the first place because I'm passionately interested in place, in the property world, the built environment. I think I tend to refer to it as the built environment. Are you hearing me okay? Because I've got a horrible echo, but if you're all right, I can live with it. Okay, right. So I think my starting point from the perspective of the built environment and indeed its relationship its role within Connected Places Catapult is that actually the built environment is not renowned, or the participants in it are not renowned for innovation, which is why actually working through Connected Places Catapult, this is what I was hoping to be able to encourage. And what I want to do today, with the help of our very expert panel, is look at where the built environment is going for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and how the participants in it can actually be doing something, doing more than perhaps some of them have done in the past, to actually drive innovation, make a better built environment. You've all listened to Lucy about all the things that we could be doing to actually make the built environment more user-friendly, more adaptable, more accessible, just make it a thoroughly better place. There's a lot of big players in the built environment world, and we need to get a lot of them on side to actually work with us on that. Now, we do actually have a very good panel of people representing some of that world. In no particular order, Dan Labbad is Chief Executive Officer of the Crown Estate. I'm sure you all know about the Crown Estate, the massive 16 billion portfolio that it has, which covers a wide range of different things, not just dignified Georgian buildings in Regent Street. We then have Jessica Bowles, who's Director of Strategy at Bruntwood. I'll say a little bit more about my initial interactions with Bruntwood when I get to my individual questions. Then we have Andrew Ferguson, who is an Executive Director at LCR. So you call yourself LCR now, not London and Continental Railways?
Just sort of my field,
okay. Yeah, just positioning you for some of our audience. And then finally, Jamie Bartley, who is CEO of Unyte Group. That's Unyte with a Y, not Unite with an I, that you provide student accommodation. Jamie is, his company, Unyte, is a pioneering company at the intersection of energy waste management and this is the bit that really gets me, the use of hemp. And I'm particularly interested in hemp and lime. And this is not hemp that you smoke. This is actually, hemp to be used in the built environment. And if you haven't been to Jamie's stand, for goodness sake, go and have a look, and he'll tell you about all the interesting things that hemp will actually do. Right, so what I'm going to do is put an initial question to each of the panel. I have given them a little bit of forewarning because I wanted them to be ready for this. Then we will just open it out and see where it develops. And I really hope we're going to get some interesting input from our audience as well. So I'm going to kick off with Dan. As I said earlier, the Crown Estate probably tends to be known for Regent Street and all those very grand buildings in London, but you've got an amazing portfolio across the country, not to mention the seabed and one or two other sort of really, really interesting things. So where are you specifically looking to introduce innovation? And how do you think technology will support you in that process?
Yeah, I think, as you say, we're traditionally known as a traditional organisation, a traditional property organisation. Actually, I'm getting a lot of feedback as well, so hopefully it's not bad for the audience. But we're not that. Our remit ultimately is to take our national land ownership, as Liz described, and put that to work for the nation. All of our net profits go back to the Treasury, into the consolidated fund. And people come to work at the Crown Estate, and people that work in partnership with us want to create value for the country. And so, the reality of the times that we all find ourselves in, and I don't think there'd be anybody in the audience that isn't trying to work out which way is up in the world at the moment, is that we're not thinking about innovation and technology for innovation and technology's sake because they're the buzzwords of business today. we're thinking about them because the world is throwing challenges at us, whether they're environmental, whether they're related to economic growth, whether they're related to community health and prosperity, that as placemakers, we have a responsibility to address. And I think, in all honesty, what we in industry and the Crown Estate is trying to do is to take, for better or worse, a relatively fixed property mindset into an agile growth mindset, working in partnership with others, because no one has anywhere near a monopoly on these challenges or how to resolve them, and take ourselves into the future. And so the way that we're looking to do that, we're pleased to announce today we're formed a partnership, a strategic partnership with the Connected Places Catapult. And that means a lot in practice, but what it signifies is us wanting to reach out because we know we don't have all the answers. And we also know that property and the physical aspects of place are but one, and I would argue a relatively small dimension in what drives the future of placemaking. One of the things that we're trying to do, for example, we manage the seabed around England, Wales and Northern Ireland. There's a whole renewable movement on the seabed, which is so exciting for this country. It's going to bring over the next 50 years tens of billions worth of economic growth. And the question that we're asking ourselves in partnership with government is, how does the UK capture that economic benefit in a different way than the way we lost it in the 90s and 50s and 60s off the back of the oil revolution? How do we do that and capture it with the green revolution? That's going to require effective placemaking, because if we don't think about the different parts of the country that could benefit from that, with the skills, the jobs and the industrial infrastructure to support it, we are going to miss that opportunity.
That sounds perfectly plausible. Now, I'm intrigued that you're a big property company, one of the biggest if you look across the UK built environment. How, if you were me, or the Connected Places Catapult, the guys there, how would you go out and sell this sort of tie-up that you've done to some of your peers? Why aren't they all queuing up to do this?
I don't know. I can't answer that question. So, yeah, I'll use my media training there, Liz.
We've done this before, Dan and I. Yeah, okay, right.
I can't speak for everybody, but I know that, in our organisation, we've had to look at ourselves very closely, because I could get up here and say, the Crown Estate is different, but the reality is we have been known as a traditional property company historically, and there's a lot of good in that. There's, but I think that was a different time. And if you think about our purpose as an organisation, our role is to ensure that we take what we've inherited as an organisation, and I think inheritance isn't about how you protect what you own, but how you create future value from what you own. And coming back to, I think, a fundamental point here, it requires partnerships like never before, and that is something that the property industry isn't used to. I was having a conversation, one of the things that as an Australian, that I've struggled a little bit working for a very British organisation, is the role that hierarchy plays in holding back freedom of thought and diversity. And I was having a conversation with a young person from the organisation the other day, and we were sitting in a room full of people, because I'm a big believer that it's about what's on the table that you're discussing, not who's around the table. But that's a challenge in certain cultural settings. And I think somebody coming into the industry who's 20 years old has as much to offer as someone like me who's been in the industry for 30 years old, because what the world is throwing at us in terms of challenge requires a little bit of wisdom and a little bit of fresh thinking. I can provide some wisdom, but I can't provide the freshest of thinking, because I've been around the block too many times. Someone who's in their 20s can offer that fresh thinking in droves. And again, if we're not thinking differently about not just innovation and partnerships, but also diversity, we are not going to have any chance of addressing some of the challenges that previous speakers have been talking about.
Oh, that's very well said. And I mean, I've been very impressed by looking at the attendees at our 2-day conference about how many younger folk we've got here, which is, really fabulous. Let's turn from one property company to another. Well, I guess we'd call you a property company. Now, I mean, you have actually successfully delivered a piece of high-speed railway. HS1 really works. But I seem to recall from my contacts with LCR quite a lot of your property portfolio with some, pretty funny old clapped out office buildings in major urban centres, not a million miles from railways. What have you been doing to modernise your portfolio? And, how far can you leverage that proximity to transport interchange? We're the Connected Places Catapult, after all. How far can you leverage that to make for success, innovation, modern environments?
Great question. I do see us very much as likewise a traditional property company. A lot of stuff we do at LCR with the history chimes what Dan mentioned in respect to who we are and how the thinking's kind of progressed over the years. We're still dining out on the King's Cross post HS1, and that's still going. We're still working with HS1, believe it or not. And you're right, with a lot of the land transfer that came from HS1, I believe, in our view, we do have a competitive advantage of being connected around connectivity, around transport hubs, and that's where most of our development will happen, with being owned by the DfT. This summit's been fantastic. Actually, some great keynotes. When I was having a think, even what Dan was talking, there's a real call for action. When we see ourselves as property companies, quite often I feel like it's an adjunct where it comes secondary to the connectivity piece. And that's a big learning point that we take away from the likes of King's Crosses and the Mayfields that we're now bringing into that piece. So yes, a lot of the estate is aging. How are we leveraging it? Well, again, it's around where we are. If the fact that it's aging, the same as everybody else with regards to putting capital into it. But the big thing that we're doing to leverage that actual position is the collaboration piece with our sister company Network Rail, probably one of the biggest landowners in the UK, with the likes of Homes England and the private sector as well. So, taking that into context, I mean, again, being here, there's a big call for action from us. Dan mentioned a few between globalization, urbanization, AI, VR, and trying to knit all these things together to get one thing to work. There's no panacea answer for that, but it is small steps towards what we can do as a propco and how that fits into the wider connection piece. But we do have a playbook of how we do it. And also, we do also acquire new assets as part of the portfolio. A lot of our assets are BREEAM excellent, some good, as well as the aging estate, and that is to deliver and unlock the wider regeneration piece, which we think is very important nationally.
Okay, well, we'll come back to some of the points you raised. I'm keen to get the rest of the panel in. Now, Jessica, Bruntwood. I've known Bruntwood for a long time. When I first got to know them, they were actually making their name renovating and developing tired old office blocks in Manchester. Bruntwood is now a renowned provider of life science facilities, Bruntwood SciTech, and I know you're working with a number of very prestigious British universities. So that epitomises change and innovation. So can you tell us a little bit about how Bruntwood came to make that journey and what we could learn from that?
Thanks, Liz, and I'm delighted to be here because I think that kind of consideration of how you evolve your business model, how you embed innovation in the thinking of the business has been something that Bruntwood has epitomised. So Liz is totally right. What we started doing was taking old buildings in city centres and tarting them up. And as we did that, we also thought about the business model. So we've been around for 50 years. And very early in our life, we were thinking about how we reframed the relationship between a property owner and the people in our buildings. So we divided up buildings, we let them directly, we built relationships with our customers, we called them customers. We got a lot of tormenting in the industry for not calling them tenants and for having this highfalutin notion that we had customers. But actually it was central to the way we thought about our buildings and we thought about the places we were in. We did that at a point where Manchester and the northern cities were starting to build professional financial services industries off the back of the industrial decline of the 70s and 80s. And we always tried to sit alongside city economies so that we were providing space for the emerging businesses that they were growing. So we didn't build a building and hope something would come, but we were trying to energize the economies of the places and take that idea that if the city did well, we'd do well. And so as the cities started shifting their economies and focusing more on knowledge sectors, the science that was coming out of the universities, startups, life sciences, we started changing the sort of space that we provided and located closer to universities, thought about the sorts of businesses we need to provide space for and move into that life sciences sector, as well as digital, as well as startups across other sectors. But that was really about supporting and following the journeys of the cities we were in and kind of cementing the purpose of the business, which was about creating thriving cities. So it kind of led us there. The cities, our partnerships, our ability to invest long term, the deep entrepreneurial spirit of our chief executive really kind of took us on that journey, and I think has given us something really quite unique. So although we are a property company, I'd see us more as a city building company.
I think that's really interesting and actually adapting to something that clearly the UK has a major leadership role in, which is, science generally, not just life sciences, the whole range of science and technology, and looking at how the property industry can change and adapt to actually support that. We can do it as well as the Americans. They think they've got the premium on that. Okay, again, lots we could follow up there. I want to just now come on to Jamie and the work of Unyte with a Y, and actually this does fit in quite well with one of the questions that's already come up on Slido. So we've been talking about the built environment, what we can do to make the built environment more innovative, more suitable for the modern world of the next 10, 20, 30 years. But of course, the huge issue in that, the big elephant in the room, is zero carbon. We all know the data about, how much of the carbon output comes from the built environment. Now, your business is all around lots of exciting ways of actually tackling the problems of zero carbon, not just hemp, but lots of other things. So how do you sell your innovative ideas to the construction and property industry?
I think it's really an educational piece, Liz. Obviously, everyone is looking for different ways to decarbonise the built environment, and a lot of the work we do is retrofitting existing residential and commercial properties. But then the materials we're using to retrofit those properties are often very high embodied carbon products. So we're sort of adding to the problem by using those materials, and that's where hemp and other nature-based materials come in. Because they sequester so much carbon out of the atmosphere when they grow, it's actually 25 times the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere that the same size area of rainforest would sequester in just 4 months, and it will go up to 4 metres tall anywhere in the UK. And in that time, it produces 4 times the biomass that forestry would as well. So a huge biomass source. But then when we take that hemp straw and we turn it into insulation or hempcrete blocks, we're taking all that carbon and we're locking it up into the built environment. So it's a carbon negative product at the point of installation, and we're locking up the carbon that is sequestered into that building long term. So it's a long-term carbon store. And ultimately, we're doing these works to decarbonise, but if we use carbon negative materials, we achieve net zero carbon a lot quicker. So it's ultimately going back to nature-based solutions. For thousands of years, hemp was a solution for humanity. We live in the 100-year prohibition blip that for thousands of years ahead it will be a nature-based solution. So I think it's really a case of looking back to nature as a whole and trying to work in a symbiotic way, a far more circular way, and look at everything as a resource and ensure that we're designing out the carbon where possible, looking for renewable power solutions and ensuring that we're actually trying to build better. Even now we're building houses that in 10 years' time are going to need to get retrofitted to achieve the 2050 target. So let's change that. The way we do that is really invest into the infrastructure. That's the big missing piece, is that you need high volumes of hemp to be produced to go into a cost comparable point with alternate materials. And you achieve that by, in essence, investing into high volumes of infrastructure. It's about 60 million per facility that we're looking to build out. Each of those facilities will allow us to do 10,500 houses worth of non-woven insulation a year, 5 million hempcrete blocks a year. But growing the 35,000 acres that will be growing as a feedstock to feed the factory each year, we're sequestering 220,000 tonnes of carbon. So huge volumes into the biomass, and then we're also replacing high embodied carbon products as well. So we really see nature-based solutions being a big part of the future forward.
So on that basis, I'll throw this open to your three other panelists. Are you all going to be rushing in to embrace a new technology based on an old technology based on nature? You going to do it?
I'm up for it. I think you know, that part of the innovation is a lot of talk around modern methods of construction and how that comes apart. My previous role to this was very much, and there are some barriers to entry, and we were building out of timber before, which has also, you know, a very good carbon effect on going forward. It needs funded. There are some barriers to entry from it, but I do think we're starting to see some more entrepreneurial, innovative funding solutions that go against what was conventional wisdom before. And actually, you know, by 2030, a lot of the funding will not come in unless we're thinking that way. And for us, what can we do as kind of pseudo-public sector? We have this in our procurement regulations. How are we going to procure these right people? So it's not just down to what we think, what we call value, be it public and social value, is a big kind of driver in how we go forward and who we do business with. And part of that thinking is, are they thinking innovatively? Is it modern? And what materials are being used? Because we too have targets around 2030 for emissions and 2050 by net carbon zero. So yes, is the short answer to that. We really need to start thinking about this.
And Dan, I'm assuming at the Crown Estate, you know, you go through a similar process. I'll ask Jessica a similar question in a moment. You know, when you are looking at a new development, you know, you will be looking at the best environmental, based on the circular economy, best way of doing it. Can you tell us a little bit about the challenges that poses? Because it can be expensive, there might not be the right raw materials. As you said, MMC, we're worried about the factories that produce it closing down and not providing the pipeline. How are you coping with all that?
I worry about it. I'm really worried about it because, again, when we look at sort of the exam question, which is how do we get to net zero as a country by 2050, and I look at the renewable sector outside of property, and you know, things like offshore wind are playing their part, but I don't think we're playing our part in the built environment. So I think at the moment, other parts of the net zero trajectory are going to have to compensate for the built environment, which I think would be a travesty on the built environment if we get there. So, you know, from our perspective, we have set a carbon trajectory for the portfolio. It's forcing some very difficult decisions on this whole notion of when do you use steel and glass and when do you retrofit, and how do you know, because let's face it, the problem is the exam question is not legally enforceable. And organisations have to decide between what's legally enforceable and the carbon challenge, where they're going to sit. And I think that from a property perspective, we're too close to legal compliance and not far enough. Now, I could argue that today, as we've discovered these things just being kind, that we can sit here and say, you know what, we've got to innovate and we've got to do these things. I think in 5 years, we're not going to have that excuse. So it is fundamental that we're starting to embrace new materials. We're starting to look at how we value properties. There's a big misclose between the cost, and you know, we talk about heritage list. Every building's heritage listed today from a carbon perspective, because we are not going to be able to tear down the stuff we're putting up. We're not going to have that choice. I look at a lot of the house building going up around the country and you go, wow, you know, that's going to need retrofitting, and we're not going to have the choices of the past. So we're trying a few things. We're looking at the moment, you know, we have a balance on Regent Street, for example. So firstly, from an urban design perspective, we're looking at linking park to park. So in partnership with Westminster and other land owners, linking Regent's Park to St James Park, and thinking about how do we promote, in an urban setting, London as the greenest city in the world. And then with the Nash architecture, with heritage constraints, we can either sit there and say that's too hard, or we can look at some really profound things like how do we look at district energy in the centre of London, and how do we look at energy provision and ensure that we get the centre of London green. We're running innovations across the country with smaller developers and house builders, because we feel that we have a massive role to promote the smaller groups in the market from and giving them access to scale. And for everyone's benefit, you know, Crown Estate, everything we do, we try to make as much of it as possible open source. So we are going to be sharing the learnings. We've got one pilot on net zero. We've got another pilot on community engagement. We don't have all the answers. We don't have a monopoly on the best ideas, but I think we want to be a role model for sharing knowledge, because I do think the carbon crisis is a humanitarian crisis before it's a market opportunity. So, you know, we've got a lot of work to do, but we're committed to it.
I've got a very interesting question on Slido. Do panellists feel finance is on their side when applying new construction methods and materials? So, you know, we do know the finance world is also quite conservative, as indeed is the built environment world. And you find banks, lenders very nervous about putting money into something new and innovative. I mean, Jessica, I saw you nodding as I was asking that question. Have you found this a problem when you're looking for innovation and getting the finance folk on side?
So I'd like to answer that in two ways, really. I mean, I thought this was a fascinating bit of discussion. We've had a history, as you described, of refurbishing, reusing buildings, and we still do a lot of that. And it's really important to us. It's in our DNA, and we set ourselves a net zero by 2030 goal for our buildings. We were the first to sign up to the UK GBC commitment around that. We didn't actually know how we were going to do it, but actually setting the goal helped us think through our pathway to net zero and force the business to really kind of work out what we knew, work out what we needed to do, and recognise what was going to happen to the values of our estate if we didn't address those early enough. So we have audited what we have. We've got plans in place that will help us retrofit the buildings that we need to and kind of get them to the place they need. We were going through an equity raise with Legal and General Capital and Greater Manchester Pension Fund, who are our partners in the SciTech JV, and they understood the need for us to invest in our estate in that way, and those investment plans are baked in to the equity that we raised and the business plan that we've got for the business. So actually we found our funders very supportive of that sort of investment. We also design new builds and want to make those as close to net zero, both in construction and operation as possible. One of our buildings is timber framed. It's extremely low carbon in its construction as well as operation. And that was much more challenging around insurances and financing and regulation. And we worked really hard, and we had to design some things out of it we would have wanted to keep. And, you know, that will take time. We find this sort of valuation in the property market really challenging in any innovation. The way that you value flexible space, short-term lets, all the sorts of things that we see in property, customers wanting, don't get value. The banks are behind on how you value those things.
I think that's a really good point. It's all very well having a good set of innovative property providers, but if the financiers, the lenders, aren't actually also starting to sort of, move the dial and actually think differently. I can remember some years ago the workspace guys complaining that the banks didn't understand their model of lots of little tenants rather than one big gold star tenant.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I think the global financial crisis proved the benefit of that. A certain very famous tenant went bust. Dan?
I think it also goes a little bit back to what Jessica said earlier about when you shifted from using the term customer to tenant. Now, today I think the industry has shifted, but it's an example, and you said you've got a deeply entrepreneurial chief executive, which is fantastic. But I do find that we as an industry take a long time to shift, and I think we can blame finance, and we can, and it's every part of the system has a role to play here. And I'm not trying to protect finance. I think it is a big part of the gravity, but I think we need to be. We can't afford to be scared to try new things, and we should be applauding it, not behind the scenes saying, "Oh, look, they're a bit different. They're trying, And I think we've got to shift from criticizing, passively aggressively criticizing progress to actually embracing it and celebrate, and in fact celebrating failure, because we're not going to get it all right. We are going to make mistakes, and I think we need to make that shift as a culture, as an industry. I really do.
I totally agree with you, and you and I have been on the same page for many years. Just a little aside on this idea of calling your tenants customers was really quite good. One very advanced and well-known company started calling their customers guests, at which one of my colleagues on the policy committee at the British Property Federation said, "Good God, that's a bit dangerous. Guests don't pay." So you really have to sort of you have to work quite hard to move some of the sort of mores, some of the traditions of our industry.
And again, I don't want to hog the floor, I do apologise, but if you take your new product, you've got a new product, how hard is it for you to try to, and there's one thing if a product works or doesn't work, but getting to a point where you've got a lot of quicksand to get through, right? It's very, very difficult, very difficult.
Absolutely, Dan, and I mean, it is hard work. What we often find as well is designers will specify, or architects will specify products that are sustainable and green and tick boxes, but then when it gets to a later stage of design, sometimes QSs get involved, and
it's called value engineering.
Yes, unfortunately, value engineered out, and I think that's one where we see, certainly from housing associations as well, anyone that's got a value for their guests that are going to be in the homes. I think then also the bio-based materials, because they also reduce the energy requirements for the property, so they reduce the operational energy requirements, and that has a value certainly to people who value the tenants that are going to be in there. What we find sometimes certainly with new build is obviously once the house is sold, there's not necessarily that as much as I think it's changing, and certainly the likes of Jessica and her team that are looking really to design zero bills. We've got obviously Octopus trying to do zero bills houses as well. I think we will see that transition where energy consumption and therefore performance of the thermal density of materials, etc., really start taken into account more, and therefore overall cost. It will be alongside the carbon value and the social value really for the tenants.
Yeah, I mean, we could have a whole separate session on social value. I'm going to park that for a moment because I've been ignoring Slido, for which apologies for people it's all been so interesting, I forgot to look at it. Quite a few people are commenting on the tendency of the built environment world, the big companies, to enjoy knocking things down and rebuilding them. And something which, frankly, they've tended to do about every 30 years. I mean, even if you look at some buildings around here, some that were only 30, 40 years old have gone and been replaced. So can I get your views on this sort of demolition and starting again versus retrofit? And of course, it's been quite controversial in the context of the Marks and Spencer's decision in Oxford Street. Are we too quick to knock things down? Who'd like to have a go at that? You knock a lot down, don't you?
Yeah, I love knocking things. No, it has been an easier route to kind of understand if something is too difficult to retrofit, repurpose. looking at that now with regards to demolition, the cost of it, and the carbon effects that does have. Many local authorities, it is becoming policy, certainly around the GLA, are saying we're not going to let you do that. So how do you want to deal with this piece? And we mentioned before that we do have some aging estate in LCR, albeit in good areas. So the short answer is we're trying to work out how we can make things viable, how we can retrofit, repurpose our real estate in order to make it work. And we're pushing not just in the fabric first, do we knock it down and what do we do with it, but actually looking at over a 25, 30-year period. I think there's a lot to be gained in the asset management piece. So that's the operational real estate, which quite often when we, as real estate, property guys, by the time we talk about yields and capitalized values, et cetera, when all that goes away, we forget that we need to manage this asset. So we reckon around 90% improvement could be over the 25 years in the operational side of things. So in short, we are not planning to knock a great deal. Last thing we knocked down, I think, was the Access building in Birmingham. Since that was 2 years ago. Since that time, all of our real estate plays have been to repurpose, and I actually think we're about to see 15, maybe 20 years of what's being called a repurposing boom. And I think when we talked about finance, the funding markets are getting into that headspace as well.
Yeah. Dan, what about your
Yeah, well, I think,
company?
again, we've aligned to a 1.5 degree trajectory and developed a carbon budget which effectively does that. And, we're having to really come up against the notion that something that's shiny, that operates green, is still the most attractive thing in the market, but the elephant in the room is embodied carbon. And so we are making decisions now based on embodied carbon, which means we are moving to retrofit a lot more than new build. And in fact, over time, trying to almost eliminate it is the reality of it. And again, the challenge with coming back to the Committee for Climate Change is we've got the next 10 to 15 years not to avoid climate change, but to mitigate the impacts. So unless we're making, and this is why new products are so, unless we're making fundamental embodied carbon decisions now and starting to bridge this commercialisation and valuation divide, the property industry is not going to play its part. And that, as I said, that'd be a travesty.
And we come back to this business of how do we drive the rest of the property industry to play its part, as you've put it. Do we have to have stricter government legislation? On the whole, this is an industry that shies away from too much regulation and legislation. So I'm still struggling with how do we win the hearts and minds of the rest of the industry? You've got the good guys here on this panel. How do we get everybody to toe the line? I mean, Jamie.
I think my personal view is that we need to procure with cost, quality and embodied carbon. So all three of them on an equal basis, because at the moment everything is procured on cost and quality, and unless people such as Dan and his team are willing to look at the embodied carbon side of things, there's no driver for people to do that. So I think it's ultimately going to need a legislative change to really force mass adoption. And I think at that point, if we have either a financial implication or even around planning potentially conditions that ensure that we are going to be valuing the embodied carbon in as it should be.
Yes, we did have a question asking about how we could use the planning system, but I'm not going to get into planning system because, again, that's another one. I'm just going to come, we've only got a minute and a half left. I was just going to sort of come back to Jessica and change the angle slightly. CPC, Connected Places, Catapult, we're looking at innovation. We're also looking at technology. And I'm sort of interested to know, and given that you're often putting up buildings for very highly technically sophisticated clients, looking at the SciTech, how far are you able to sort of embrace technology and make use of it? Because quite often the occupiers aren't very good. You can put great technology in and then the occupiers mess it up, and don't know how to use it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I don't think we've got this completely cracked. There's so many interesting things you could do, and working out what you actually need, what your customers want, how you expect to interact with all the things that you use needs to sit at the very heart of that. And I think it also comes back to the partnerships that you're creating with the universities, with local authorities, with your customer base, so that you can co-design that together and also make these frictionless, easy places to be, not just for the people inside the buildings, but the people around them. So you're not creating digital fortresses. And that's the worst thing I think we could do.
And that's very interesting, picking up on what Lucy was saying earlier, because we haven't really had time to explore some of what she was talking about, which is actually the role of the built environment in community. And community are just as important a stakeholder as your shareholders, your occupiers, your financiers, and everything else. We're out of time. I get this little red light and lots of zeros. So just sort of one last thought from each of you. You can make it as quick or a couple of sentences. Where do you think the biggest innovation is going to come in the property industry in the next 20 or 30 years? What's the one big thing that the property industry's got to embrace?
Adaptability to sustainability.
Okay, Dan?
I would say that, so therefore what I'm going to say is the process of the engagement process with communities and other stakeholders in defining what good looks like. Because if we can't do that, everyone will have a different view and we won't move forward.
Good one. Jamie?
I think really it's about embracing bio-based materials and also designing around buildings that can be deconstructed and reused rather than demolished.
Great idea. Jessica?
You've all had such brilliant one ideas. I think there's something about how you unlock the talent of all the people working in your business and in related industries to tackle these issues in new, innovative ways together. What we've seen is that when you throw a challenge over to our business, they love it.
Interesting you say that. I chaired a session in MIPIM last week and we called it Dare to be Different. And it meant being different both in the people we have, but also in accepting the different ideas we come up with. I really hope the built environment world is prepared to dare to be different. So, will you join me in thanking our panel for what I hope you found was an interesting discussion?